to start because I know other people will be joining us, but I'm going to go ahead and start because we have a time limit here. And I want to make the best use of our time in this conversation with author Karma Lekshe Tsomo, who is the author of a book that I'm very enthusiastic about, Women in. And I will make sure in the notes, which we always prepare after these events, that you have good information for getting a hold of that book, Women in the Buddhist Traditions. And it's a New York University Press book from 2020, so we'll make sure you have that information. I'm Mary Hunt at the Women's Alliance for Theology, Ethics, and Ritual, and I'm joined by two of my colleagues, Patrice Rupp, who's with us doing IT, and she is part of the Brethren Volunteer Program, and Pamela Miller, who's an MDiv student at Wesley Theological Seminary, who's both of whom are with us this year. We're delighted to have them. I would like to be not the first, but at least one of those to wish you a wonderful International Women's Day. I said that in the locker room this morning at the Y to women as we were all getting dressed, and a couple of them kind of looked at me. I don't know that they knew exactly what International Women's Day was. I said, well, we're celebrating that today, you know. So it's always good to spread the word to people who might not realize that this is what it is. If you received the water greeting, you know that we indicated in our greeting that we appreciate the countless contributions of women around the globe, and every day is International Women's Day here at Water. So let today simply be a time to spread that respect worldwide for equality and well-being for all creatures. So that is our International Women's Day greeting, and I hope you have a great day. I want to a special word of welcome to you, Professor Tsomo. We will meet you in a moment with some more introduction, but a warm welcome to you because I think this may be your first water program. And if it is, we delight in your presence and we hope that you find it worth your time. Let me begin then, as we always do at Water, with a land acknowledgement. We at Water are on the indigenous land in Silver Spring, Maryland, that is the traditional and contemporary land of the Piscataway and Anacostan peoples. We acknowledge the trauma and injustice toward indigenous people that is deep in US culture and history. We join in efforts to eradicate it and make reparations for the genocide involved. Water's work is aimed to bring about social justice. Please join me for a moment in considering the Native people on whose land you are privileged to sit today. Thank you. Let's invite you to mute your Zoom so that we have a nice clear line for this presentation. Please, that does not mean you, Professor Tsomo. Please leave yours open. But we at Water bring our feminist, womanist, spiritual values and intellectual efforts to change. Mainly backgrounds. There are, of course, people in our extended circles who come from many and varied religions and from no religious background whatsoever. Of course, all are welcome. Today's focus on women in Buddhism is a way to stretch, for many of us, to learn what we can about millions of women around the world as they live out their religious commitments as Buddhists. Let me simply say a word about our format, and then we will launch right into our conversation. I will introduce our speaker, who will have 20 to 25 minutes to introduce us to her book. And I want to mention it again, Women in Buddhist Traditions. I think this is a book that you will want to have in your library as you expand or deepen your repertoire in terms of what you know about religion. It is, I think, a definitive text that helps us to understand the first 2,500 years of Buddhism over a large globe. We will hear from her at first. There will be plenty of time for dialogue, Q&A afterwards with her, and then we'll keep the Zoom open after 2 o'clock Eastern time when she must be on to other events, but we'll keep it open for those who wish to continue the conversation. We at Water always take notes, and the notes along with the video of this presentation will be on our website. And we hope that those notes are helpful to you. I get good feedback from people saying, oh gosh, the notes are so useful, because then I can go right back and find out what I missed. But you'll also have the video. So you can rewatch and listen again if there are terms or concepts that pass you by the first time. So I want to repeat, please turn your audio to mute so we cut down on noise. And then when it's time for conversation, we'll invite you to turn it back on again. We will finish, as I said, at the top of the hour, which is 2 o'clock on the East Coast, to respect everyone's schedules. And then you can go to our website, www.waterwomensalliance.org, look under programs and teleconferences, and you'll find this. It takes a little while to get it up. Sometimes it takes 4 or 5 days to get it up, but you'll have the opportunity to. I want to introduce our speaker, and I'm delighted to welcome you, Karma Lekshe Tsomo, whom I have met in feminist interreligious circles, and more so, whom I have read for years. Professor Tsomo comes to us with an impressive scholarly background. She has a BA from the University of California in Berkeley in Oriental Languages and 2 MAs, both in Asian Studies and Asian Religions from the University of Hawaii. Her doctorate is in Comparative Philosophy from the University of Hawaii, where she lives currently. She's a specialist in Buddhist studies, and she taught for at least 2 decades, as I reckon it, at the University of San Diego. She's now retired, particularly interested in issues related to women in Buddhism, questions of death and dying, Buddhist feminist ethics, Buddhism and bioethics, religion and politics, Buddhist social ethics, and Buddhist transnationalism. Golly, anything she's not interested in. And now, luckily for those in Hawaii, she's back there as professor at the University of Hawaii. So that's, I guess, what scholars call retirement, moving from one beautiful place to another. As a scholar activist, she has promoted the Sakyarita International Association of Buddhist Women, which I hope we'll hear something about, and the Jam Yang Foundation, an innovative education project for women in developing countries with 15 schools in the Indian Himalayas, in Bangladesh, and in Laos. Again, we'd love to hear about those projects. Professor Tsomo is a prolific writer. Among her works are the book I have cited now 2 or 3 times, Women in Buddhist Traditions, Sisters in Solitude, 2 Meditations of Monastic Ethics for Women, and Into the Jaws of Yama, Lord of Death, Buddhism, Bioethics, and Death. So, goodness, there's a lot of material to cover here. I'm deeply grateful for you to agree to be with us to share your extraordinary knowledge of women in Buddhism, and especially on this very festive day for all of us. Professor Tsomo assures me that she will cover 2,500 years and a broad sweep of the world, east and west, as she opens our eyes and our hearts to a powerful religious tradition about which many of us know very little. Your esteemed colleague, Professor Jose Cabazon, wrote in a comment about your book on women in Buddhism the following. Jose Cabazon wrote, "This book is destined to become the standard introduction to the topic of women in Buddhism." That was published almost 3 years ago, so I can forgive Professor Cabazon for using the future tense. Nevertheless, he got it absolutely right, and it is that already. So welcome to you, and thank you for gracing us on International Women's Day. With special appreciation for the depth and quality and passion of your work.
Yes.
Go right
Thank
ahead.
you, Mary, and aloha to everyone. I'm currently sitting on the lands of the Hawaiian people and acknowledge a debt of gratitude for all of those who have maintained Hawaiian culture and ethics and values over many generations, many centuries. We're in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and it's just dawning here. And we're in the midst of a tropical storm, and the waves are about 30 feet high. So it's a very different scenario. But I'm really honored and privileged to meet with all of you and share something of what Buddhist women have been doing around the world. I've been following the work of Water, and of course, Francis Kissling has been involved with Sakyadita for many years, going back to Cambodia in the 90s. So, and I'm extremely grateful for the support of all my colleagues. Together we are a formidable force, so I'm really honored to speak with you today on International Women's Day, and to bring an international focus, actually. Oh, now it's raining, so, and I'm living I'm basically outdoors. In any case, I prepared about an hour's talk, and I'm going to condense it back into about 20 minutes. So um, I think images are the best way to tell a story.
Yeah, let me just interrupt you for a second. There's nothing we can do about the noise because it is nature's own. And when we get to about 25 minutes into your presentation, if you have not uh, found a graceful way to wrap it up, I'll give you a little reminder. How's that? Because
Okay.
I want to be able to talk to you too.
Oh, thank you for your flexibility. That's wonderful.
Thank you.
Okay, great. So now here I'm going to share the screen, and let's hope this works. Oh, yes. Okay, and then we have to go here. Let's see, slideshow, and go to the first slide. Let's see. Here we go. Okay, can everyone see this? Yeah, we're good? Okay, great. So I'm going to start at the beginning by saying that Buddhism is a path of awakening. It's about transformation of the mind. And in the nature of the mind, there is no gender. Consciousness is awareness and knowing. Clear awareness, clear knowing. And this has no genitalia. So the concept of a gendered mind in this tradition is ridiculous. So we start from there that there should be no discrimination between men and women in the Buddhist tradition, and you'll often hear Buddhists say exactly that. However, of course, as we know, conditions on the ground are always quite different. It all begins with Mother Maya, Queen Maya, in India about 25 centuries ago, or 5 centuries before Christ, we could say. And she was the mother of the prince who later became the Buddha. So her conception was miraculous. She conceived in a dream of a white elephant. So, of course, if we did a feminist analysis of all of this, we'd need more time. But the fact that she conceives, basically immaculate conception here, is the starting point for all of this. It means that the prince remains pure by not being conceived in the ordinary way. So she gives birth also in a very spectacular way, not through the ordinary birth channel where the young prince would be contaminated by the birth fluids, but emerges from her right side, immaculate, pure. And so he is born, he's exalted, the whole palace rejoices, and he's destined to become the king of this small kingdom in northern India. He's raised in the palace with all of the perks of the royal life, and he has reportedly 40,000 girlfriends and a beautiful wife and son, but he feels dissatisfied. So this is one image in the text. The Buddhist texts give mixed messages. Some are extremely supportive of women, and very, the Buddha himself praises women's qualities, and there are other images that are more questionable, like this one where he views his harem and sees them all snoring and drooling and disheveled, and he develops a dissatisfaction with his palatial life. So at that point, he abandons the royal life, including his beautiful wife and newborn son. So, of course, in a feminist analysis, we would call him a deadbeat dad. But in the Buddhist world, this is considered the great renunciation, that he is willing to renounce his own happiness for the welfare of the world. And he makes a determination to go and seek the meaning of life and to achieve awakening. He wanders for 6 years in the forest, practicing all the austerities of the spiritual path that were common in that day, what we call today Hinduism or Brahmanism, including intensive fasting, where he became so thin he could barely meditate. And he realized that these austerities were not helping him to achieve his goal. So at that point, he accepted rice pudding from a young woman, a village woman named Sujata. We have her name, we have this history, we have quite a lot of history actually, or we might call it narrative because there's no real historical data to back it up, no historical evidence, but lots of stories. So he accepts her offering of rice pudding and walks across the river, chooses a tree, sits down and makes a determination not to get up until he's reached the final goal of awakening, which he does on the morning of the 7th day at dawn. And he goes on to teach in northern India for 45 years to all different kinds of audiences, diversity of age and ethnic background, social status, and so forth. Now, sadly, his mother passes away when he's only 7 days old, and he's raised by his auntie, who is his stepmother, Mahapajapati, and she becomes the first Buddhist nun. So his mother passes away, and again, feminists would question, well, she served her purpose in giving birth to the young prince, and then she can disappear? But that's the story. That's what we have. And so he's raised by Mahapajapati, but she's very kind, very compassionate. She raises him as her own son. And later stages what may be the first feminist march in history. She leads 500 palace women across northern India. They go ahead and shave their heads. The Buddha is reluctant to admit women to the order because apparently he's afraid that they will be unsafe wandering in the forest. And we know that even today women are not safe wandering in the forest. And so he tried to convince her to stay at home and live like a nun, but safely in the home. And she did not accept that. She insisted on joining the monastic order, like the men, and led this procession across northern India and requested again to be admitted to the monastic order, the Sangha, and he relents, he agrees. Through the intercession of his cousin Ananda, friend of women. So there are many praises to him that are chanted, especially in temples in Japan, praises to Ananda for interceding on behalf of the women and assuring them of a place at the table. So the Buddha went on to teach for 45 years all across northern India to audiences of men and women and people of all different caste backgrounds. And caste was a huge factor, so he was, we could say, a social activist in that he admitted monks and nuns of all caste backgrounds, and that was quite radical, revolutionary really at that time. He described the Buddhist society, the ideal Buddhist society, as being comprised of laymen, laywomen, ordained men, and ordained women. Now, we could do a whole analysis of this graphic, but at least women got in the picture. And you'll see that a fully ordained woman is shown here, and then a woman in white. And this is the catch, is that in some countries, the lineage of full ordination for women is not recognized. So I'll show you a little bit more about the history, but this is the general setup. The Buddhist society is meant to include both laymen, laymen and women, as well as ordained men and women. So we're off to a very good start. And then, of course, things happen. So now, the next big moment in Buddhist women's history is when the daughter of Emperor Ashoka travels to Sri Lanka. He was a fierce warrior who killed thousands of people and later developed remorse and became a Buddhist and did many things to help the people in northern India at that time. And he had a son who was a monk and a daughter who was a nun, which is extraordinary in itself. I mean, how many world leaders are willing to allow their kids to become monastics? It's rather rare. So when the son goes down to Sri Lanka, he ordains hundreds of young men as monks, and then the Queen Anula, requests to join the order also. And he said, well, I cannot do that because I'm not a nun, but my sister is a nun. We can invite her to Sri Lanka, the island of Lanka, and she could ordain the women. So indeed she did. She traveled by ship from northern India down to Sri Lanka, which was courageous, extremely courageous, and is noted for bringing a sapling of the Bodhi tree, meaning the tree that the Buddha sat under when he achieved awakening. Then this would be a descendant, and she brought such a sapling down to Sri Lanka, for which she's enormously famous. And in fact, she is also very famous. Her name is Sangamitra, friend of the Sangha, a friend of the order, and she ordained hundreds of women, mostly the palace women of the attendants of the queen, but the order took off and flourished in Sri Lanka up to the 11th century. And we should note that Sangamitra Day is a national holiday in Sri Lanka. I believe it's the only national holiday in the world named after a woman. So she's rightly famous. And the order continued until the 11th century, after which it was transmitted to China in the 5th century CE. So she lived about 4th century before the Common Era. And then the lineage traveled to China in the 5th century CE. From China, it then was transmitted to Korea, Taiwan, Vietnam, unfortunately not to Japan. But this lineage of ordination is going strong. There is something like 20,000 fully ordained nuns in Vietnam, almost 10,000 in Korea. Some people say up to 80,000 in China, but it's hard to get accurate statistics. But in other words, in the northern Buddhist countries, what we call the Mahayana tradition, the ordination lineage for women is strong and vital and doing tremendous work for the society. In the southern lineages, Sri Lanka and India and so forth, Thailand, Burma, Laos, Cambodia, they say it doesn't exist and they're reluctant to accept it from outside. Let me explain. Now, one more very famous woman in Sri Lanka is named Hema, and she is renowned for bringing a tooth of the Buddha from India to Sri Lanka in her hair. In other words, she pinched the tooth of the Buddha and took it to Sri Lanka. So I don't know the karma for that, but she's really famous. And you can go to the Temple of the Tooth in Kandy in Sri Lanka even today, and the tooth is enshrined there. Now, as a side note, we could remember that there are many very positive images of women in the Buddhist tradition, especially in the northern traditions. We have portraits of women and stories of women as bodhisattvas, and even as Buddhas. This is Tara. She has 21 aspects. This is the white aspect. She's renowned throughout especially the Tibetan cultural sphere. Tibet, Nepal, Bhutan, Mongolia, Russia, the three Buddhist republics of Russia, and around the world. So in monasteries in these countries, every morning, monks and nuns are saying prayers to Tara. So, and again, awakening is possible regardless of one's gender identity, in theory. Okay, and we have Prajnaparamita, who's called the mother of all Buddhas. It's wisdom, and it's in female form. And we have Sarasvati, who's the bodhisattva of learning and the arts. We have Kuan Yin, the bodhisattva of compassion, is male in India and male in China up to the 12th century, where she does a sex change and becomes female. And we don't know exactly why, how this happened. It could be that Buddhism by that point was just way too male. It could be that people automatically associated compassion with women. It could be that there were many female gods in China before Buddhism arrived. And so it was not, unusual for them to assume that this figure would be female. She takes on a Madonna appearance, and sometimes is even shown with a child. Traditionally, she was holding a vase in her hand, but later we have one here where she's holding a child like a Madonna. So she becomes extremely popular. You'll see her in Chinese restaurants around the world, representing the potential for compassion that we all have. There are also wrathful forms of women enlightened figures. This is Vajrayogini. This is in the Tantric Buddhist tradition, which is a later development, especially in the Tibetan cultural sphere. And people visualize themselves in these forms. So again, to really challenge our conceptions of gender, you have men throughout the Tibetan Buddhist world visualizing themselves as an enlightened woman every day. And in theory, even 24/7. So this is something quite extraordinary too. Now, conditions on the ground, of course, don't always match our ideals. Let's see how things are working out in the real world. This is Burma, where nuns do not have access to full ordination, but we see that they have changed from wearing white, the color of a layperson, to this outfit, a pink robe, but with, I believe, what is rather subversive, the orange skirt underneath and an ochre shawl, just like the monks. So they've worked out a median space for themselves. They do not have access to full ordination, but they do have access to Buddhist education at a very high level. And many of them are exemplary in Buddhist studies and go on to teach. They have their own monasteries, and they are quite happy with their situation. They feel as long as they have the conditions to practice, namely food and shelter and education, does full ordination really matter for them? We'll leave this as an open question for now. But the women in Burma are meditating, not only the nuns, but also the lay women are meditating really sincerely and gaining high levels of spiritual realization. So this is something to think about. Now, here is a monastery in Thailand, where one nun, who was previously a professor, Professor Chatsaman Kabul Singh, became ordained in 1993, has her own temple outside of Bangkok, and she's begun ordaining women, fully ordaining women in Thailand, where traditionally they don't have full ordination for women, but she's the trendsetter. And because of her social status, her mother was a nun, her family were aristocratic, she taught at one of Thailand's leading universities for decades, and so she's in a position to really make changes. So they went down to Sri Lanka, got fully ordained, and came back. Now, in Laos, there is no full ordination. The nuns keep 8 precepts, including celibacy. They have all lived very difficult lives. We know about the secret dirty war in Laos. Most of them lost their entire families thanks to American bombings. And they had seen so much suffering that they entered monastic life. And you can see that they are not terribly well supported there, but they get enough to eat. And they're very happy to have the opportunity to strive for liberation in the body of a woman. Though there is a tendency of women to pray to be reborn as a man. And this is something that has been critiqued in many writings. Of course, we can look at it from both sides. From one perspective, I mean, why would anyone pray to be reborn as a man? On the other hand, if all of the benefits are going to male practitioners, and the conditions for practice in the male body are so much easier in these countries, then for them it makes a kind of sense. Now, here is an exceptional case in Nepal. The nun in the center, Venerable Damavati, ran away from home at the age of 13 to Burma, got detained on the border, but they could see that she was because she didn't have a passport. And the officials eventually saw that she was very sincere in wishing to become a nun and study Buddhism, and they allowed her to do so. She stayed in Burma for 13 years, achieved the highest degree, and returned to Nepal to more or less single-handedly restore Theravada Buddhism in the Kathmandu Valley. She has tens of thousands of students, majority women, and she's ordained 400 nuns, and she took the extraordinary step of receiving full ordination in 1988 in Los Angeles. And this was definitely against the advice and even almost threats of some of her male colleagues, but she went ahead and did it. So we have amazing, and she's still living. She's still in Kathmandu. And this is Sri Lanka. You can see that many of the nuns there have gone ahead and received full ordination, although it is not officially recognized, either by the male monastic order or by the government. The nuns still are not allowed to have their ordained names on their passports, but they strive ahead. They're just, and of the 4,000 nuns in Sri Lanka, about half, about 2,000 or more, are fully ordained. So they're just breaking boundaries left, right, and center, and quietly meditating at the same time. So again, you hear these arguments, well, is it necessary to be fully ordained? Is it necessary to be a nun to achieve liberation? And women make their own choices. Now here's China. We know that China was under severe repression of religion from 1949 up until 82. There were no ordinations held in China, but people find their ways. And since that time, Buddhism has begun to flourish, and ordinations were again held. This is just one example. And hundreds of monks and hundreds of nuns are ordained every year. And the women have their own monasteries that they support. They find support from the lay community to build and maintain. And they're doing extraordinary work, still under the watchful eye of the government. So they have to deal with that. But within those bounds, they're doing truly amazing work. Now this is Korea, which is another exceptional case, with a lineage of full ordination. And this is where I was fully ordained in 1982. I became a nun in 1977 in France and practiced as a novice for 5 years, and I wanted to become fully ordained. But how could I do it? In the Tibetan tradition, there is no lineage of full ordination. And so, with the blessing of His Holiness Dalai Lama and some of my teachers, I went to become to receive the ordination. I was headed for Taiwan when I discovered that the ordination was being held in Korea in the traditional way, with a full quorum of monks and nuns. And I knew that this was important for gaining acceptance for the ordination in the Tibetan tradition, which is my goal. And I hope that I will see it before I'm in a box. So I studied with the nun in the center, who has herself an extraordinary story. She is no longer living, but she became the founder of the Korean Bhikkhuni Association, Bhikkhuni meaning fully ordained nun. And she served as the president for many years. So the Korean nuns have organized themselves very well. When we held our conference there, our first conference in Korea, over 1,000 nuns attended. And now this year, again, we will hold the Sakadita International Association of Buddhist Women Conference in Seoul, and we welcome all of you. And I expect that there will be more than 1,000. I mean, there'll probably be a couple of thousand Korean nuns there. So, and they have very good educational facilities, which they have established, they have worked for. And I so respect all of the hard work that they've done. And this is really since the war, which devastated Korea in the 50s. So it's very contemporary, it's very recent. Now this is Vietnam, and we know that the lineage there has continued through time, but of course it has also gone through a few hiccups. And the most difficult period was from 1976 to 1982. The war, which we call the Vietnam War, they call the American War. And then when the communist regime was established, Buddhism was oppressed during those years. So that's 6 years, things were really difficult. And a lot of people went to jail. But after 82, things relaxed, and Buddhism is again flourishing in Vietnam, amongst the laity and the ordained Sangha as well. Many wonderful monasteries, great education programs, 3 Buddhist universities, where women outnumber the monks by far, and they're doing very well. They're not being offered university positions equitably, but we're working on it. Okay, now here's where...
Let me just interrupt for a minute.
Yes.
Flying, and I wonder if you want to make some concluding remarks, and then we can open for comments.
Okay, I'll conclude with real fast the slides of where I work up in the Himalayas, in northern India. Among these people, the first nuns from this area. I want to point out this difference between the monks' monastery on the right and the nuns. Oh, can you see it? The nuns' monastery on the left. So obviously, equality is still a dream, but the nuns are happy. They say, we're so lucky we don't have to get married, we don't have to have babies. We have freedom. So even they're poor, but they choose freedom. Okay, and the younger generation has no idea of what the older generation went through. They have now opportunities, literacy, which was previously very at a premium. They do the ritual instruments. The little girls are joining. Young boys are not joining, but the girls are joining in droves. And this is the first group of women to achieve the highest degree in philosophy, 20 of them, including 6 of my own students. And they're going on to do great things. And the last is the full ordination issue. So we've been meeting with His Holiness for years, and it still drags on. But the nuns are moving ahead. They're doing great work. They're so adorable, and they're going for it. So I wanted to show you what they sent me last year. Happy Women's Day. And, they somehow are picking up feminist values. People blame it on we Western nuns and imposing our feminist ideas on these poor, unsuspecting women, but actually they are the trendsetters. So this is the organization that I founded for education back in 1987. We have 12 monasteries in India. This is Sakadita, the International Association. And this is where I sit right now. So thank you for giving me this opportunity, and sorry to go over time.
Thank you so very much. I cannot tell you how happy I am with this presentation and how indebted we are to you for your scholarship and for your activism. You model for us the very kind of work that so many of our colleagues around the world are engaged in. They're deeply rooted in their own time. So you have found your cohort here, if I didn't say so, and we have found you, which is wonderful. I wanted, for those who got onto the call a little bit later, I just want to say that the background noise you're hearing is in Hawaii, where Professor Tsomo is living. And as you can see from the absolutely gorgeous setting, the wind is brisk and there is a storm. So it looks like the winds are calming a bit at the moment, but I actually looked up the weather and it's really wild for the rest of the day there. So please take good care of yourself. I want to open the floor now with one last mention of this book, which I think is just central to our thinking, Women in Buddhist Traditions. And Professor Tsomo has published this in 2020. It is a compendium of much of what she talked about using the slides today, but it also provides some incredible resources for further study and certainly raises in a deeper way than this time allows many of these hard questions. So I can't recommend it highly enough. I have been glued to it, as people around here will tell you, for the last several days. And having looked at it before when I made the decision to invite you, but I really spent some time with it. I have a bunch of questions and I'm sure others do too. So let's just open the floor. And if you'd be so kind, friends, to use the reaction button at the bottom right hand of your Zoom screen and use the raise hand function as I have just done. When you finish, just lower your hand and that will bring you up in the queue for us so we can see you in the gallery and recognize you and move along. So there are lots of us, and please make your comments as synthetic as you can. The floor is now open. And I believe there are also already questions in the chat. So we'll raise some of those as time allows. But let's, Rosemary Ganley and Mary Yellen, if you both have questions in the chat, would you like to put those out here? Hopefully as the noise ceases a bit, we'll have a little clearer line. So Mary and Rosemary, if you want to go first, and then others will follow.
Sure. Am I on, Mary?
You're on.
Yeah, okay. I just want to thank our guest for, if this is World Women's Day, our minds have been stretched with insight and data, encouraging data of women in leadership, modeling a spiritual search and social action in many countries. It humbles me. Now, Karma Lekshe, would you comment on Europe and North America and the impact of small Buddhist communities in our common goals?
Yes, I've been working with Buddhist communities in Europe and the United States since the 70s. I guess actually the 60s. I'm a 60s person, right? And people have done remarkable work in trying to establish Buddhist centers, and it has not been easy. There's not the same tradition of automatically supporting Buddhist institutions. So we've all struggled, here in Hawaii and, on the continent and all around the world. In Western countries, it has taken a lot of courage and resources and hard work on behalf of a lot of people. But I would say that it's been quite successful. Now, it depends on what we call successful, because Western people have their own interpretations of Buddhism. And we in the 60s were willing to go to India and live under really difficult conditions for 10 or 20 years to study in the tradition, and young people today are not ready to do that. So it's taking different forms, which it has throughout history. I mean, Buddhism has been transforming all along. But here I could put in a word for the tradition of ordination. You know, the Buddhist Sangha is said to be the oldest continuous organization in the world. And the question that's in the chat, is it necessary to be ordained in order to achieve liberation? No, it's not. There are examples of lay people who achieved liberation, but it's believed that ordination, being a monk or a nun, living a monastic life, is conducive to liberation because you have time and you have full energy to devote to your spiritual development. And so women in particular know the amount of responsibilities entailed in marriage and family life. How many hours do we have in the day, and how many hours can we devote to our spiritual practice? Whereas those who are living in a monastic life can practice 24/7. They still have to eat and clean the monastery and all of that. But they consider it an advantage, and I personally do too, to have all the free time in the world to meditate as much as you want, and there's no one telling you can't do it. So you don't have to go to birthday parties, you don't have to go to any of those, sort of family obligations. You're free. We're free agents, right? And so that is considered the advantage of ordination. Now, ordination, does it impact our rebirth? Well, our spirit, our actions affect our next rebirth. And our actions can include, from a Buddhist point of view, wholesome actions are what we're going for. So that would include social service and ethical conduct, and wholesome thoughts, words, and deeds. So they look at actions of body, speech, and mind. And lay people as well as monastics can do good deeds. So, of course, they do believe that being ordained in itself is meritorious. Keeping celibacy is considered meritorious, especially in a tradition where the goal is to overcome desire. It's through desire that we take rebirth. Desire for, sexual desire, specifically. Okay, when we die, we're looking for another rebirth. We see a couple mating. Ooh, that looks good. And we hop right in, and there we go, spinning around again and again and again in the wheel of rebirth. And so it goes. And this is how we break out of it, is to overcome desire. So, yes.
Great.
And
I
is
think
that good? Okay.
I think you've answered Mary Jelinek questions, Mary Jelinek, to your satisfaction, and you've touched on the question from Sheila Curran. The question she has raised from Ireland is celibacy required?
For monks and nuns, it is. That's one of the precepts. And that is one of that's what it means to be a monastic. Now, one thing to clarify is that all teachers are not monastics, and all monastics are not teachers. So you see lamas in the Tibetan tradition who are married with children. They're not celibate monastics. The confusing part is that sometimes they wear robes and shave their heads, which personally I think is not appropriate, but it's become a kind of tradition, so some people still do that. But it's not compulsory for lay people at all. The vast majority of Buddhists are lay people, married with children, right? So, and of course there's a difference between voluntary celibacy and involuntary celibacy, as we know. But this is voluntary celibacy. And then you could say, well, do young children know what they're getting into? And so the Dalai Lama has been encouraging monks to wait until they're older and know what it means to take on a lifetime commitment to celibacy. Here, my personal feeling is that men have a much more difficult time with this than women. For women, it's very easy to live a celibate life. But for men, it's extremely difficult. Some people even say that's why they honor monks more than nuns, because they know that it's more difficult for men. So this is just my personal observations.
Yeah, many things are more difficult for men, sad to mention, but I wondered what you thought of the New York Times article, Eyes on the Target, the Kung Fu nuns smash convention about the nuns in Nepal and I just thought this was so interesting because this was February 27th, New York Times,
Yes.
saying that the women were reported as saying that they engaging in martial arts has helped them to break down gender barriers and to develop inner confidence. And I thought that combination was marvelous. I wonder what you thought about this. A little bit of a sensational article, but quite extensive coverage, my goodness.
It's wonderful. It was amazing. Nuns make the front page of the New York Times. Yes, it was great. And they've been making a lot of breakthroughs. Of course, the leader of their organization is male, but he's very open-minded on gender issues and environmental issues, just noting that he has not helped them get fully ordained. But they are doing remarkable work, and I do believe, I trained Aikido for 3 years when I was young, and I believe that the martial arts definitely instill confidence, and they're very empowering for everyone, but especially for women. So I think that, but it's a new thing. Ordinarily, physical exercise is not encouraged in the Buddhist world. You're supposed to be meditating. You're supposed to be taking care of your mind. But I think the martial arts do help us to cultivate our mind. So I would applaud them. Yes.
Thank you. I'll make sure that the link is in the notes too, so people can see the pictures too, because it's great to see these absolutely beautiful women with these beautiful red fans, which they're using. Not swords, but red fans. Let's move on to Melissa Lampkin. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Tsomo. I had 2 questions about life in the monasteries. First is, I was wondering if they follow the same pattern as typical male monasteries, where they only have one main meal a day and only eat what is given them by the surrounding community. And second, I'm curious about all the children in the photos. It looks like, are there children growing up in the monasteries? And if so, whose children are they? Thank you.
Yes. Now here we have for the question about meals. I think we should recognize that traditionally the 10 precepts include not eating after noon. It's based on a story where a monk turned a corner at dusk and almost collided with a woman who was pregnant. She had a miscarriage, and so the Buddha said, when they brought the matter to the Buddha, he said, oh, well, let's just make lunch our last meal of the day, so that the monks wouldn't be out wandering around in the dark, colliding with pregnant women. Okay, so this is the story. So in the Theravada countries, that's the southern Buddhist countries, Sri Lanka, Burma, Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, Bangladesh, and so forth, they're very strict about this 12 o'clock rule. In the northern Buddhist countries, of course, the weather is much colder, so they often make an accommodation. Some of them do keep this rule, but some do not. And in the case of the Tibetan tradition, when they came as refugees, at first they were trying to keep this rule. And in my school, I know that 4 monks died. They simply weren't getting enough nutrition. And so the Dalai Lama said, okay, then let's have dinner. Right? And so in our monasteries, we offer 3 meals for the children, especially because in our monasteries, they are vegetarian. And so we want them to get enough nutrition. And the second question was about the children. Well, in not not in all monasteries do they join as children. Especially today, the trend is to send the kids to public schools, and then the number that become monks and nuns decreases, of course, because there are just so many options today. In the Himalayan region, for some reason, the children still just, a lot of them really want to be monks and nuns, especially nuns. The numbers of young boys becoming monks has really decreased in the last 10, 20 years, but the number of young girls who want to be nuns has increased dramatically, especially as educational opportunities are available. If education programs are in place, the nuns will just flock to the monasteries. I try to get them to go to public schools, but they refuse. They don't listen. They say, "Oh, we're not interested in what they're teaching." And then the older ones say, if we send them to public schools, then they want to be nuns. I say, fine. If they don't want to be nuns, then, quality rather than quantity. But the young girls, they just insist on becoming nuns. And so what we've done is to implement education programs in the monasteries. But it's a different kind of education. It's monastic education, Buddhist studies, plus foreign languages and other subjects. So that's the model that we've adopted in the Himalayan region. But remember, the Buddhist traditions are so widely varied, as you saw from the slides. So each one, in most of the countries, Vietnam, Mongolia, and so forth, they're all going to 12 years public school and then just opting to become nuns, which is also quite extraordinary.
I want to just point out a question and a comment in the chat from Rosemary Ganley that there's a Sangha of 20 people in Peterborough in Ontario, and the convent of the Sisters of St. Joseph. So that's about par for the course, I think, at this point, and it's wonderful.
This is wonderful. Yeah, the dialogue among Buddhist and Catholic women in particular has been really, really heartwarming. And,
yeah.
I personally taught at USD as a Catholic school for 22 years. I've been involved in the Nuns in the West gatherings for many years. And so, yeah, some of you were there, I believe. And in some cases, I feel closer to the Catholic nuns than to some of the Buddhist lay people because we share the same lifestyle and the same aspirations. And so that's been wonderful too. And many Catholic nuns have attended our conferences and been among the most popular speakers.
Well, you're welcome to send me the information on the upcoming conference in Seoul, to which you so kindly invited all of us, and I will make sure that it goes out with the notes. There are several nuns, former nuns as well, here on the call, and many people will be accessing this as they do at www.waterwomensalliance.org. And this will be available, as I said earlier, both the video and the notes that we will take. So I have the sad responsibility of stopping Professor Tsomo in her tracks because she has another appreciative audience awaiting her. I want to thank you again, Professor Tsomo, for being with us. Thank you. The greatness of your scholarship and of your committed life is really a blessing to us today on International Women's Day. So although it's always International Women's Day here at Water, let this be one when we take the time to respect women worldwide and turn our actions into equality and justice making for all.